Hey guys, it's Emma Vigling with TYT Politics. It is early in the morning. Oh Lord, I really feel like it, and I'm getting a little stuffy because we've been on the road for a little bit, but I'm hanging in there. Um, some disturbing news that broke last night. More and more Donald Trump accusers are coming out of the woodwork, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys had all the updated information and wanted to give the rundown on it. I just want to start off by saying, for everyone that's saying that the Clintons have something to do with these accusers coming forward, that may be the case. It may not be the case. I don't really want to speculate on whether or not the Clintons had something to do with it because I don't really think it's the point. I do think that they're I do think that the claims stand on their own merits. And the thing about it is that, like, as much as we want to talk about how corrupt the Clintons are, and Jordan and I have been doing a ton of coverage on that, this also is extremely disturbing and deserves some merit. We're trying to get the WikiLeaks stories to you as much as possible, but just because we also want to talk about this incredibly important story with Donald Trump does not mean that we're not going to be covering the Clinton corruption. So again, I don't want to speculate on whether or not Donald or the Clintons had anything to do with these accusers coming forward, because, by the way, that would just be speculation, and that would be me doing a disservice to all of you guys, and not really telling you the truth, because there's no way for us to know. So last night, a New York Times story broke where two accusers came forward. Both of them have been corroborated, or have corroborated. Their stories have been corroborated by witnesses that are close to them. Neither of them went to the police. That's important for you guys to know. But of course, when you're dealing with someone who is as powerful as Donald Trump, as wealthy as Donald Trump, then it's difficult for people to come forward. And of course, you feel intimidated. You feel like your career may be jeopardized, and that's the story of many sexual assault victims that have stayed in the dark. So I'll just give you guys the rundown of the four accusers that have come out of the woodwork since last night, and in the past, I would say 12 to 24 hours. This first one is from the New York Times story. Jessica Leeds, she's now 74 years old, and she told the New York Times that they took a flight together in New York, and Trump sexually assaulted her, raised the armrest separating them, grabbed her breasts, and tried to put his hands up her skirt. So that is the earliest of the accusers. She told some people, and I'll read directly from the New York Times story, but this is just kind of the rundown of what's been coming out. In 2003, apparently a woman named Mindy McGilvray, I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name, said that he groped her at Mar-a-Lago, the resort down in Florida. She said that basically he groped her by her rear end, and that she had a photographer friend who could corroborate it. That story's in the Palm Beach Post. Then in 2005, Rachel Crooks was the second woman that was interviewed by the New York Times. She was working in a real estate company, Bayrock Group, and she was doing some business at Trump Tower. And she said that Trump was kissing her on the mouth, and it was incredibly inappropriate all of a sudden. And then in 2005, the same year, this is a separate story, a People reporter, Natasha, said that Trump pushed her up against a wall and forced himself upon her to kiss her. So those are the four real stories that have been breaking. I will read directly from the New York Times article specifically about the first story and the woman who came forward, who's now 74 years old, who I saw being interviewed. And again, this is just my subjective opinion, because of course none of this has been played out in a court of law, and I don't want to make any false statements. Donald Trump has never been convicted of anything close to this. The biggest, I would say, legal track record in terms of sexual assault was that his ex-wife, Ivana Trump, accused him of raping her at the time, which she now has taken back and just says that she felt violated. But back then, he settled the case where she accused him of raping her. So clearly, I don't want to speculate, but he did settle that case despite the fact, even when maybe even because of the fact that she had these rape allegations. So here I'll read directly from the New York Times story about Miss Leeds and Miss Crooks, two of the women that seem to have been sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. If you believe their stories, which to me they seem fairly legitimate, but again, that's my subjective opinion. More than 3 decades ago, when Miss Leeds was a traveling businesswoman at a paper company, Miss Leeds said she sat beside Trump in the first-class cabin of a flight to New York. They had never met before. About 45 minutes after takeoff, she recalled, Mr. Trump lifted the armrest and began to touch her. According to Miss Leeds, Mr. Trump grabbed her breasts and tried to put his hand up her skirt. He was like an octopus, she said. His hands were everywhere. She fled to the back of the plane. It was an assault, she said. Miss Leeds has told her story to at least 4 people close to her who also spoke with the New York Times. So it's unclear if she told those people the story as immediately after it happened, or it allegedly happened, or if she told the story to them later on. But 4 people corroborated her story to the New York Times. The article continues. Miss Leeds was 38 at the time and living in Connecticut. She had been seated in coach, but the flight attendant invited her to take an empty seat in first class, she said. That seat was beside Mr. Trump, who did not yet own a fleet of private aircraft, records show. He introduced himself and shook her hand. They exchanged pleasantries, and Mr. Trump asked her if she was married. She was divorced and told him so. Later, after dinner trays were cleared, she said Mr. Trump raised the armrest, moved toward her, and began to grope her. Miss Leeds said she recoiled. She quickly left the first-class cabin and returned to coach, she said. I was so angry and shook up, she recalls, as she sat on the couch in her New York City apartment on Tuesday. She did not complain to the airline staff at the time, Miss Leeds said, because such unwanted advances from men occurred throughout her time in business in the 1970s and early 1980s. That's, of course, very, very legitimate. Most women in the workplace were having a very difficult time back then, as they continue to have now. We accepted it for years, she said of the content. We were taught that it was our fault. She recalled bumping into Mr. Trump at a charity event in New York about 2 years later and said he seemed to recall her insulting her with a crude remark. She had largely put the encounter on the plane out of her mind until last year when Mr. Trump's presidential campaign became more serious. Since then, she's told a widening circle of people, including her son, nephew, and 2 friends, all of whom were contacted by the New York Times. So I guess I take back my original statement. That's when she started telling the people close to her, was once his presidential campaign kicked off. The second woman interviewed by the New York Times was a woman named Rachel Crooks. Miss Crooks was a 22-year-old receptionist at Bayrock Group, a real estate investment and development company in Trump Tower in Manhattan, when she encountered Mr. Trump outside an elevator in the building one morning in 2005. Aware that her company did business with Mr. Trump, she turned and introduced herself. They shook hands, but Mr. Trump would not let go, she said. Instead, he began kissing her cheeks. Then, she said, he kissed me directly on the mouth. It didn't feel like an accident, she said. It felt like a violation. It was so inappropriate, Miss Crooks recalled in an interview. I was so upset that he thought I was so insignificant that he could do that. Shaken, Miss Crooks returned to her desk and immediately called her sister, Brienne Webb, in the small town in Ohio when they grew up, and told her what happened. So this was immediately corroborated, according to the sister of the victim, alleged victim. She was very worked up about it, said Miss Webb, who recalled pressing her sisters for more details. Being from a town of 1,600 people, being naive, I was like, are you sure he didn't just miss trying to kiss you on the cheek? She said, no, he kissed me on the mouth. And the sister replied, that is not normal. A few hours after Mr. Trump kissed her, Miss Crooks returned to her apartment in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn and broke down to her boyfriend at the time, Clint Hackenberg. I asked, how was your day? Mr. Hackenberg recalled. She paused for a second and then started hysterically crying. After Miss Crooks described her experience with Mr. Trump, she and Mr. Hackenberg discussed what to do. I think what was more upsetting than him kissing her was that she felt like she couldn't do anything to him because of his position. Here we come to the center of the maze, he said. She was 22. She was a secretary. It was her first job out of college. I don't remember her saying, I can't do anything to this guy because I remember her saying, I can't do anything to this guy because he's Donald Trump. Days later, Ms. Crooks said Mr. Trump, who had recently married Melania, came into the Bayrock office and requested her phone number. When she asked why he needed it, Trump told her that he intended to pass it along to his modeling agency, Ms. Crooks' modeling agency. Ms. Crooks was skeptical, but relented because of Mr. Trump's influence over her company. She never heard for the modeling agency. So, honestly, you can decide whether or not to believe these stories. They seem fairly credible. The New York Times does its due diligence in stories like this. Yes, of course, we can lament over the fact that they often regurgitate Clinton talking points in order to break a story that is well documented. They facilitated the Bernie Bros and the chair-throwing narrative in the primary. We can mistrust their reporting in that sense. But clearly when they're doing, they're a large corporation, or they're a part of a large corporation, and they do their due diligence when they're vetting people that they're going to be interviewing for a major story like this. They're not going to pick anyone up off the street and just say, oh yeah, we experienced sexual assault by Donald Trump. That's just not going to be the New York Times' MO. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about that. Donald Trump was given a chance to respond in this New York Times article, and the New York Times author refers to Donald Trump's response on the phone to this article as being highly agitated, and he denied every one of the woman's claims. None of this ever took place, said Mr. Trump, who began shouting at the Times reporter who was questioning him. He said that the Times was making up the allegations to hurt him, and that he would sue the news organization if it reported them. You are a disgusting human being, he told the reporter, as she questioned him about the woman's claims. Asked whether he had done any of the kissing or groping he had described in the recording, Mr. Trump was once again insistent. I don't do it. It was locker room talk, which is his talking point that has been fed to him by his advisors who are much more disciplined than he. But the women who shared their stories with the Times, the recording was more than that. As upsetting as it was, it offered them a kind of affirmation, they said. Okay, so then I've skipped around throughout the article. I would encourage you guys to read the full article, New York Times, entitled "Two Women Say Donald Trump Touched Them Inappropriately." That is the larger story. We move on to the two other stories. I'm not going to read them in full, but the People magazine reporter, Natasha Stoynoff, so she alleges that Trump also sexually assaulted her. She was covering Donald Trump on The Apprentice, covering a variety of his appearances. She had a friendly relationship with Donald Trump because she was a tabloid reporter and he was a reality star. So, of course, she didn't really see anything completely nefarious about the relationship, but I will read the Daily Beast summary of the People article because I think you guys kind of get the picture. Stoynoff, who writes that she had developed a friendly relationship with Trump and Melania while on the Trump beat for People, had come to Mar-a-Lago to report on the couple's first wedding anniversary. When pregnant Melania went upstairs to change clothes, Stoynoff writes, Trump said he had a tremendous room to show her and led her into another room and shut the door. There, she writes, within seconds he was pushing me up against the wall and forcing his tongue down my throat. That's in quotes. The alleged incident ended when Trump's butler entered the room to say Melania was on her way down. You know we're going to have an affair, don't you? Trump allegedly said when the butler left. The second story that is outside of the New York Times story, so there's 4 women that have come forward recently, is in an interview with the Palm Beach Post. Mindy McGivlaw, I'm having trouble with her name again, but her first name is Mindy. The woman, then 23, told Palm Beach Post on Wednesday, all of a sudden I felt a grab, a little nudge. I think it's Ken's, who was her friend, photographer friend at the time. Camera bag. That was my first instinct. I turn around and there's Donald. He just sort of looked away quickly. McGillivray said that she recalls telling the photographer, Ken Davidoff, Donald just grabbed my ass. So, these are the 4 women that have now come forward. I think the New York Times story really does paint a wonderful picture of how when you're a woman in a workplace, especially Jessica Leeds, who, when this occurred in the early 1980s, women don't have the ability to speak out. They are trying to make it. It's a very male-dominated environment, and you get maligned and you get dragged through the mud if you're going up against someone with that amount of power and you're trying to go up against their team of lawyers. And also Rachel Crooks, who was a secretary. A secretary doesn't have any power against Donald Trump, who's we don't really know how much money he makes because he won't release his tax returns because they're under audit, which, by the way, we all know that's BS. But someone with that amount of power, influence, and money, as a woman, the Rachel Crooks was 22 and a secretary. You think she's gonna go up against that guy? So it is difficult, yes, because none of these have been played out in a court of law, but you also have to understand why the victims didn't come forward, because there's a massive, massive power dynamic difference. So Donald Trump is a celebrity. Donald Trump is very wealthy, and these women were not, especially Rachel Crooks. They were just simply women that came in his path, and they, I'm sure, just wanted to forget about the incident and move forward with their lives. So taking away from their accusations is a mistake. Taking away from them because they didn't report these incidents at the time is a mistake. Honestly, if it had happened to me, I don't think I would have reported it. So it doesn't really, I don't think that makes a difference. Whether or not you want to believe them is up to you. But there's a pattern that is developing, and I think if we want to say that Bill Cosby is guilty by public trial, then I would think that this is the beginnings of Donald Trump being guilty by public trial. Again, I don't want to equate. Well, look, sexual assault is sexual assault, but Donald Trump did not drug or rape anybody. But, so again, I don't want to make it a false equivalency, but the waterfall with which these accusations are coming forward is similar. So just be on the lookout for more accusations. I do think that while we want to focus on policy on this channel, the moral character of both candidates needs to be played out in journalism. And moral character goes beyond corruption. Moral character goes beyond the WikiLeaks emails or what we find out in that. And Doobie says that Bill Clinton raped women. You know what? Bill Clinton's not running for president. So I can't have this conversation with you guys. Donald Trump is running for president. We didn't know this stuff about Bill Clinton at the time when he was running. When he was first elected president, I wasn't even born. So let's give this a rest. If Donald Trump is sexually assaulting women, he is running for president, and his moral character can come into question, just like Hillary Clinton's does. But this doesn't have to do with policy because he doesn't have a policy background. But this has to do with the fact that he takes advantage of his own power to sexually assault women, if this is the case. So take that with what you will. I can't. I'm reading these comments right now, and just because I'm criticizing one candidate doesn't mean I'm not criticizing the other. This deserves criticism. So Donald Trump is very possibly a sexual deviant, someone who is sexually assaulting women, and we have to play this out in the public because I guess it is important to note that the media has already really convicted him, but I don't necessarily think that that is a mistaken conviction based on the fact that these women all have similar stories. So again, we will see how this plays out, but I hope that you guys have a good day. more convictions or more accusations could be coming, and we will keep on this WikiLeaks stuff for you. All right, have a good day, guys.